We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
They're going to catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, Doctor, help me.
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're going to make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first.
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the American International Podcast. I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And today we're talking about kind of an oddity, The Hand from 1960. The Hand was directed by Henry Cass and written by Ray Cooney and Tony Hilton. And the movie was produced by Bill Luckwell.
The Hand stars Derek Bond as Robert/Roger Crawshaw, Ronald Leigh-Hunt as Inspector Munyard, Ray Cooney as Sergeant David Pollitt, Reed DeRuin as Michael John Brodie, Bryan Coleman as George Adams, Walter Randall as Japanese Commander, Tony Hilton as Police Sergeant Paul Foster.
It also stars Harold Scott as Charlie Taplow, Gwenda Ewen as Nurse Johns, Michael Moore, not that one, as Dr. Metcalfe, Ronald Wilson as a doctor, Gerard Green as Dr. Simon Crawshaw, Jean Dallas as Nurse Geiber, David Blake Kelly as J. Marshall, Reginald Hearne as Noel Brodie, and Madeleine Burgess as Mrs. Brodie.
The film starts off in Burma 1946 with a rather unusual situation.
Not only that, it's rather unusual music. It's a very jazzy soundtrack for a movie that opens us up in wartime Burma.
After the war is over?
Yeah, well, that's a major continuity error for this movie. The quote-end quote Oriental typeface tells us that we're in Burma in 1946, but the text of the movie says that the war is still going on. We're just going to have to get past that, though, and get through the movie.
We see that 3 British soldiers have been taken as prisoners of war by a Japanese commander named Sui.
They are herded into his quarters, where a bunch of other officers are standing. One of them is taking notes. Commander Sui offers them chairs to sit, but they decline. And then the grilling begins. Commander Sui asks the soldiers the position of their regiment.
One of the British soldiers reminds the others that they are only required to give their name, rank, and serial number.
Which he does. He is Corporal Adams. I don't think the number matters. I didn't write them all down.
44312.
Jeff wrote them all down. Commander Sui says, well, this is most unfortunate. Then he moves on to the next captive and asks his name. This man mulls it over for a second before saying his name is Bernard Shaw. His rank is general, and his serial number is Whitehall 1212, which, if you know anything about old phone exchanges, you know that that's not really a serial number. Corporal Adams tells Mike, for that is his name, that he's only obliged to provide the name, rank, and serial number as he did himself. And then he says he can't ask for anything else. He says his name is Brodie and he's a private. And his number is 73241, sir. So I did write one number down.
Commander Sway doesn't care about rules. He's going to ask another question anyway. He asks Brodie about the location and strength of his regiment.
When Brodie doesn't answer that question, he moves on to the third soldier, who's an officer, who just repeats the name, rank, and serial number line. However, he doesn't give his name, and that's important. Commander Swede says that there are other ways to get the info that he wants, and the soldiers are escorted back to their cell. When they're in there, they are alone, and they start talking. Brodie complains about their circumstances, and Adams tells him that his smart mouth is only making things worse. And the officer, who I will remind you that we don't know his name, is fretting about what to tell them when they ask him. He says that the Japanese have to know that their unit couldn't have gotten too far from where they were captured. And Corporal Adams says that it's good that we don't know where the unit is now. And the one with no name says, of course we know. And again, he worries about what to tell them. Brodie says he doesn't know anything about this war, but he knows that there are 50 men out there who have nothing but rifles and grenades, and they're waiting for a relief that won't be there for 3 days. At this point, the Japanese soldiers come in and take Brodie away. Adams wonders what they'll do to him, and the other guy says that they should have decided what they would all say. Should have got their stories straight, I guess. Adams says they won't get much out of Mike.
So Brodie is being questioned again, and Commander Sway asks again for the location and strength of his regiment. And Brodie says that they did inform him of where they were headed before he was captured, and he tells Sway that they were all going to Tokyo. This isn't the answer that Sway wanted, so he lops off Brodie's hand.
The other two hear this happening, and the unnamed soldier wonders which of them they'll take next. And it's Adams. When Adams gets into the office, he doesn't answer either, and he gets the same punishment, his hand cut off by the commander's sword.
The unnamed man is alone in his cell, and he grimaces every time he hears one of his comrades screaming as their hands are chopped off. He doesn't know what's happening to them, but it sounds horrible.
He looks very conflicted as well. Now we are in London today, as the caption tells us.
There's a drunk lying in a doorway. Bobby comes across him and recognizes him and calls him Charlie. And he also notices that this man has a wad of cash in one hand and the other hand is missing. So he helps him up and he's going to take him to a hospital.
At the hospital, a detective strolls in and talks to the copper on duty outside the hospital room. That's the man who found Charlie sleeping on the street in his strange condition. The detective that comes in is Sergeant David Pollitt, and he's complaining about having to work on what was supposed to be his early night off.
The man's name is Charlie Taplow, and Sergeant Foster is the Bobby who had found him and brought him in. And he's describing to Detective Pollitt how he had found him with a load of money in his pockets, and his hand had been recently amputated. And according to the doctor, it happened 2 days ago at most.
They're wondering how he came across all that money and the reason for the amputation. Sergeant Pollitt suggests that it might be insurance money or maybe gambling winnings. But Foster tells Pollitt that Charlie said he sold his hand for £500.
The doctor allows Foster and Pollitt to question Taplow, so they go into his room to do so.
The doctor says that Charlie has a high fever. He should have been in hospital for 10 days following the amputation, but as we have said earlier, it's at most 2 days since the hand was chopped off.
As they're questioning Taplow tells them that a man named Roberts offered him 500 quid for his hand. And after the operation, the doctors tried to hold him, so he snuck himself away. He took a train to London, but jumped off the train before its final destination.
He says he was afraid of getting picked up, and Sergeant Pollitt says if he saw the man called Roberts at the hospital with him. Charlie nods yes, but then says he can't remember. He's very vague on the topic. The doctor throws out the cops, and outside the room, Pollitt once again wonders where the money really came from. He says if he reported what Charlie had told them, he'd be accused of drinking himself.
The story is just too fantastic.
Pollitt asks Foster to stand guard outside the room over his vehement protest because he also anticipated having a night off. As Pollitt leaves, we see two men getting out of a car and going into the hospital. In the hospital, the nurse leaves Charlie's room to kind of flirt with Foster. And then we see the men who are in the hospital sneaking up the fire escape outside.
The nurse goes back into the room to bring Taplow his food, but his bed is empty and he's missing.
She runs to the window, which is open, and looks outside and sees him being hustled down the fire escape. She goes back and gets Foster, who runs in and looks out the window and sees the men who are snatching Charlie and runs to get back up.
So Inspector Munyard is called in. He knew Charlie Taplow when the inspector was on the beat, so he has a personal interest in this case.
He sends Foster back to the Hackney police station so that if they hear anything about Taplow, Foster can report to Munyard, and then talks to Pollitt, who apologizes for dismissing this case so lightly. Munyard says that it's okay. He's known Taplow for years and heard all his drunken stories, but he should have known that this one was just a little bit different.
Just then the phone rings, and Munyard receives the phone call, and he's informed that they just pulled Charlie Taplow out of the river and he's been murdered.
Munyard tells the police officer who called him to send Foster down to the river, and then he and Pollitt leave. In the car, they're smoking and wondering about what rich man would pay so much for a hand and what they would need it for.
So now Munyard and Pollitt are back at the police station, and looking for clues, they are going through Charlie Taplow's wallet.
Pollitt says that Taplow didn't get on the return train, so Munyard says he must still have his ticket, which Pollitt finds in a matchbook, and it says Brockleton. Apparently there's only one hospital in Brockleton, the Allen House Nursery Home, and that's where they head.
They go in and ask the doctor if they've had a patient named Taplow. The doctor says there hasn't been anybody with that name, and as he's speaking, Pollitt is looking through the patient registry, and he finds a registration for the name of Roberts. This is a name they've heard before.
The doctor remembers this case. It was a man who'd been in an accident, and he was treated for septicemia, an infection, with a hand amputation. The doctor describes the patient, a drunk old man, late 50s, who checked himself out against doctor's orders.
He also says that the patient was brought in by Dr. Crawshaw. And he also says that there is no medical file for this Roberts because the surgery was an emergency and no staff was called in to assist except for the nurse that was already on duty.
They want to know if Dr. Simon Crawshaw is there, and he's not. And that's unusual because he hasn't reported in for 2 days now, says the doctor on duty. But Nurse Geiber is there, and they send the doctor to go find her.
Just then, Dr. Simon Crawshaw arrives. He's very amenable to answering questions.
Crawshaw says that he found Roberts by the side of the road after what he assumed was an accident. What a stroke of luck. Crawshaw brought the man in to fix his injury, and he disappeared after a night, though he wanted to keep him.
Munyard tells Crawshaw he should have kept him because he's been murdered, and by the way, his name was really Taplow, not Roberts. And then Nurse Geiber comes in. Crawshaw goes to her and tells her that she has nothing to worry about because she's done nothing. And then he goes off to find the Roberts file. Pollitt follows him into the office. This leaves Nurse Geiber alone with Inspector Munyard, so he has a few questions for her. He asks her if Roberts had had any visitors. She said there was one man with one hand who visited the night of the operation. There was an argument between him and Dr. Crawshaw, and Crawshaw made him leave without seeing the patient.
In Dr. Crawshaw's office, the doctor offers Pollitt a cigarette, and Pollitt says, no thanks, I just want the file. Back outside, Nurse Geiber tells Munyard that the visitor asked to see Roberts, and Munyard says, not Taplow? She's a little confused. Now back in Dr. Crawshaw's office, he's making a show of looking for the files, but instead he opens a drawer and finds a gun. Back with Nurse Geiber and Munyard, she says that if she ever saw the man again, she would know him.
And back in the office, Pollitt and Crawshaw are now struggling, and the gun goes off. Munyard runs into the office to see what happened, and Pollitt explains that though he tried to stop him, Crawshaw has shot himself. Nurse Geiber is distraught. She screams, Simon! Later, Munyard and Pollitt are discussing possible motive. Why was the surgery performed? Was it even necessary?
Munyard says that the lack of a file proves that the surgery was unnecessary and that the story about a roadside accident was likely faked, and wonders why a respected surgeon would do that surgery. He didn't think it was for money. He was pretty well set up as it was. And Pollitt suggests maybe it was blackmail. Munyard agrees that that's probably the case and asks Pollitt to check his past for a motive. And they also wonder about the one-handed visitor that came to see Roberts that night.
And this is when someone comes in and announces that Roger Crawshaw is there. He's Dr. Simon Crawshaw's cousin, and Pollitt recognizes the name from Crawshaw Children's Hospital and says he's got bags of money. This new Crawshaw enters, and we recognize him as the unnamed man from the prologue.
So I guess his name is Crawshaw? Roger Crawshaw is in shock that his cousin committed suicide. He says that they were like brothers, and he can't imagine any cause for him killing himself. Munyard says it was probably to avoid arrest, and Crawshaw doesn't believe that. But Munyard tells him that Simon performed an operation that was irregular, possibly illegal. And Roger's not buying it.
But Roger does say he's noticed a change in Simon recently, and that he seemed on edge.
Munyard wonders if that's because he was being blackmailed, and that offends Roger. Munyard tells Roger that the patient in question has subsequently been murdered, which seems to come as a surprise to Roger.
Roger does say, though, that Simon had asked him for a loan of £500, but Simon wouldn't tell him why he needed the money, so Roger refused to give it to him. And he also says that Simon was involved with a nurse on staff, and he assumed he needed it for her.
Roger says that he's a wealthy man, and he'll do whatever it takes to prove that Simon was innocent. And Detective Munyard says he's just going to look for the truth.
The phone rings, and Inspector Munyard answers. The phone call is for Dr. Crawshaw, so Munyard assumes the role of Crawshaw for the purposes of this call. And the caller asks if Roberts is still there, and Munyard asks the caller to identify himself, but he says never mind, just answer the question, is Roberts still there? This goes on for longer than it should before Munyard says yes. Who is this? And the caller hangs up. So Munyard immediately calls the operator to have the phone call traced.
Pollitt is grilling Nurse Geiber. She cries that she didn't get 500 quid from the doctor, but yes, she was in a relationship with Simon. She says he's her husband, and then she runs off.
The operator was successful in tracing the call. Munyard gets the address and writes it down. Pollitt tells Munyard that Nurse Geiber was Dr. Simon Crawshaw's wife, so that was a false lead. So as jazzy music starts to play, Munyard and Pollitt head off to the address.
Munyard tells Pollitt that name Roberts isn't just subterfuge. A man by that name certainly exists. Now we're in the city, London, I assume, and Munyard parks the car near a house where the call came from. It's a boarding house, and its landlord doesn't want to admit the police, but eventually relents. He offers them some tea in the kitchen. Munyard declines, but Pollitt accepts until he sees the look on Munyard's face.
The landlord's name is Marshall, and he tells the police that any of his tenants could have used that phone, but that he was not the one who made the call. The only one in right now is a Mr. Brodie, so they're going to knock on his door and talk to him.
He eventually lets them into his room, and he's a little under the weather, shall we say, drunk, and he keeps one hand firmly in his pocket. He claims he didn't make any call to the Allen House nursing home. Basically denies everything else, including knowing about the hospital or who Crawshaw is. Pollitt offers Brodie a cigarette, and he takes it and lights it, but only uses his left hand.
They ask him if the name Roberts means anything to him, and he kind of reacts.
Well, they also ask if he knows Charlie Taplow, and Brodie just glares and says that they're talking in riddles. Munyard says there's been a murder and a suicide, and explains that Crawshaw took his own life, and Charlie Taplow was killed. He gives Brodie the information that even though the name of the patient checked in was Roberts, it was really Charlie Taplow. They leave, but they say they're going to be coming back.
When he's sober. Outside, Pollitt is laying 50-1 odds that Brodie was lying. And Munyard says that he believes that not only was Brodie the one who made that phone call, but he thinks that Brodie was likely the one-handed visitor who came to see Roberts the night of the operation.
Munyard says he's going to get Nurse Geiber and bring her back to make a positive ID, but tells Pollitt to stay behind and watch Brodie. Pollitt reminds Munyard that he's supposed to have an early night. His girlfriend, who's totally real, is waiting for him. And Munyard says to tell her that you've got another date.
Inside, we see Brodie making a phone call. He's calling Roberts, and he's threatening him.
He now knows that he's been cheated, and he vows revenge.
So Pollitt's outside keeping an eye on Brodie, and Sergeant Foster is supposed to be joining him, but he hasn't arrived yet, when a couple of thugs jump Pollitt and throw him in a closet of some sort.
A closet off the alley? London is so strange. Then a car pulls up, and after a very clumsy edit, we see a mystery man getting out. We only see him from the knees down.
He's wearing a trench coat, and he has nice shoes.
And obviously the two thugs who took care of Pollitt are with him, because they flank their boss, who rings Brodie's buzzer.
Brodie answers the door and says, "So you've come," and the two of them go to Brodie's room. Brodie says, "I'd like to show you something," and he starts rummaging through a desk. And we see the mystery man with his hand behind his back, brandishing a knife.
Finally, Foster gets dropped off, just in time to see Pollitt stumbling out of his temporary prison. Pollitt says, "Never mind me, let's check on Brodie," and they rush to the door.
They find a man knocking on Brodie's door. The man says that he's Brodie's brother, Brodie.
There's too many people with the same name in this movie.
The man says that he's Brodie's brother and he thinks something's happened to him.
The three of them are able to bust the door in just in time to see Brodie with a knife in his back. However, he's still alive. Pollitt goes to get help.
As Brodie's brother leans in, Brodie says that it was Roberts who did this and the police can't help and that you have to get him for me.
This might be a good time to point out that the brother who just died is Mike Brodie, and the other brother is not Daryl, but Noel Brodie. And I had to watch it 3 times before I finally made that connection. Pollitt is out calling for help when yet another Brodie arrives on the scene. This is Mrs. Brodie, who is Mike's wife. She wants to go in, but Pollitt says she can't. There's been an accident, and he draws her away.
In the room, Noel Brodie finds half a button on the floor. He picks it up and pockets it.
Why do you think that's a clue of some kind? Pollitt is grilling the landlord, who knows nothing and saw nothing. Then he asks that landlord, who is basically useless, to go outside so that he can talk to the missus alone.
Mrs. Brodie tells Pollitt that Brodie had been looking for this Roberts for years, but he wouldn't talk to her about it, so she didn't really have any details. And Pollitt asks her how Brodie came to lose his hand, and she says that he never would talk about that either.
It's very strange.
But she assumes it had something to do with Roberts.
Pollitt promises her that they'll get the culprit, and at that time, Nurse Geiber is brought in to the crime scene. She positively identifies Brodie as the man in the hospital who was trying to see Roberts on that fateful night. And Munyard has Foster run her back to the hospital. In modern times, they could have just snapped a picture on their phones and texted it to her, but she had to come down there for this.
Now, Inspector Munyard is asking Noel Brodie how Mike Brodie came to lose his hand. And Noel says that his brother was born that way.
And he does the Columbo one more thing trick and asks about Roberts. Brodie says he knows the name, but not the story behind that.
Noel Brodie is free to go, leaving Pollitt and Munyard free to discuss the case.
Pollitt predicts that this Brodie will take the law into his own hands. And speaking of hands, Munyard is convinced that Brodie is lying about how Mike lost his. They vow to check into that story, and Munyard notes that anyone who has any info on Roberts somehow ends up dead. Munyard tells Pollitt he believes that Brodie thought that Roberts was the one being operated on. That gives him a motive, because he found out it was Taplow. They also note that the room has not been investigated very carefully yet.
Pollitt starts searching the room, and it doesn't take long before he finds a box.
What's in the box?
This box has a severed hand in it.
It's a freshly, if sloppily, amputated hand. Back at the station, Munyard is talking to someone who confirms that Brodie was born with no deformities, and Pollitt arrives with Crawshaw's personal papers.
They have a moment of witty banter, and Munyard informs Pollitt that Noel Brodie's story was a lot of nonsense. Pollitt said that Noel Brodie's landlady said that Brodie packed a bag and left early that morning. And the phone rings. It's Mrs. Brodie.
So many Brodies. She's calling to report that she's being followed, and as she speaks, our mystery man sneaks up behind her. She asks what he wants. He wants to talk to her. Then he uses his hook to hang up the phone.
He says he's not going to hurt her. He just wants to speak to her, and that he knew her husband.
After Munyard's call is disconnected, he tells Pollitt that they need to get over there ASAP. Now we get to see the face of this stranger, and it's Adams, George Adams.
You remember him from the prologue.
He's come up from Norwich to talk to her, not hurt her, so they go into her apartment. He claims to be an old friend who wants to tell her something because he heard of Mike's murder, and he knows who killed him. She asks why doesn't he go to the police, and he says because the killer will get him too.
And she asks, Roberts? And Adams seems surprised that she knows his name.
Adams confirms that yes, it is Roberts, and Brodie had a good reason to have a grudge against him and want revenge. Adams wants her to tell the police what he knows but can't tell them, but he doesn't get a chance to tell her what that is.
No, because the police have arrived. Adams needs to sneak out because if he talks to the police, Roberts would find out and kill him for sure. So Mrs. Brodie sneaks him out the back way. Then she goes to answer the door. It's Pollitt. He's annoyed that he rushed all the way over there and that she didn't keep this mysterious man so that he could provide a lead to her husband's killer.
He accuses her of having a nice, cozy little chat with the guy.
She says his name is George Adams and he came up from the country.
Pollitt wants to know how Brodie and Adams know each other, and then he asks if Brodie was in the forces. She says yes, he was in the army, and then asks why.
Just an idea, says Pollitt.
Now we're back with Munyard, who gets a call to confirm what we just found out, that Adams and Brodie were in the army together. And now they have Adams' address.
There's a little more witty banter between Pollitt and Munyard.
It's all about Pollitt's supposed girlfriend, who is totally real and actually exists, but he never gets to see her.
And Munyard says that young officers shouldn't get hitched anyway.
And Pollitt says, well, you did. And Munyard says, well, my case was different. I married the super's daughter. And Pollitt says, is that how you got your job? And I think before he realizes what he says yes.
But just then the phone rings, and it's Mrs. Brodie again. She says that Noel Brodie has been in contact with a man who claims to know Roberts, and that Brodie is meeting him at Liverpool Station, and they're going to Norwich to meet with Roberts. And that's enough for Munyard. He has enough information that he feels he knows who Roberts is, and they're going to go see Adams.
Now we're in a train car with two men who are riding opposite a mother and a little girl. In the car, it's Roger Crawshaw and Noel Brodie. Roger is telling Brodie his version of the story, that George Adams changed his name to Roberts after the war. And he wants Brodie to deal with Adams, after which he will spirit him out of the country.
The little girl interrupts this conversation by introducing her dolly, Belinda, to the men.
And by some strange coincidence, this doll also only has one hand. This movie's pretty heavy-handed. Haha.
Crawshaw seems amused by this little girl. Brodie, on the other hand, looks really annoyed.
The little girl's mom tries to get her to stop bothering these strange men, but the little girl shuts her down with a, "Mummy, I'm talking." And she tells them that she's going to the country as well.
She also notices that Crawshaw has a broken button on his overcoat. Brodie hasn't been paying much attention to this exchange, but he kind of perks up at that news.
So the mother and the little girl at this point get out of the car.
From a moving train, apparently.
Yeah. They go out by the same door that someone will later be thrown out. Brodie asks Roger if he knows where the other half of his broken button is, and Roger denies knowing it. But this was a trick question, as Brodie is holding the other half of the button in his hand. As we remember, he found it in his brother's apartment at the scene of his murder.
Brodie holds up his half of the button and finds it's a perfect match to the broken button on Crawshaw's overcoat. This meant that Crawshaw was in the room just a few moments before he was when they discovered his brother's murdered body. Crawshaw thinks that's a fantastic accusation.
And not in a good way.
But Brodie has all the information he needs to deduce "You're Roberts!"
And the struggle begins. They fight a little bit, and eventually Roger opens the door that the mother and little girl went out of and uses it to throw Brodie off the train. I really don't know what happened to the poor woman and her little girl and her doll.
Now we're at the Adams house. There's a knock on the door, and it's Roberts. So apparently he got off the train as well.
Probably in the more traditional manner.
Adams reminds Roberts that he promised never to come there again, and Adams' wife comes in and asks him to leave because he'll frighten their son.
Adams says he stayed out of the business between Brodie and Roberts. Adams wants to bury the past, but Roberts says Brodie won't let him. And just then, Roberts hears the police arriving at Adams's house.
And then, unfortunately, Adam's son Peter comes out of the other room, says, "Mummy, the telly's gone wrong again." And Roberts immediately grabs the boy and tells his parents that they'd better not say anything to the police if they ever want to see their boy alive again. And he and Peter escape out the back.
Then the cops come in. Munyard asks about Roger Crawshaw, a.k.a. Roberts. He wants to know if Adams knows who Roberts is. Adams and his wife are staying mum because Crawshaw has their child. Munyard asks the Adamses if they know who Roger Crawshaw is. They don't.
Maybe you know him better as Roberts.
They give each other a little side-eye, but deny knowing Roberts.
Then they ask Adams why he called on Mrs. Brodie earlier in that day. He says that he had heard of Brodie's death and wanted to express condolences. Outside, we see Peter giving Roberts a little punch, and he is able to escape.
Very easily. And the next thing you know, he's walking in the back door. He's home.
And the Adams family is reunited.
They're all together ooky.
That's probably where Thing came from.
What?
That's where Thing came from.
Oh, yeah, that's where Thing Adams came from. Wow, we've really connected all the dots here. Now that their boy is back, Adams is free to tell the cops everything. And Peter Adams tells the cops he last saw Roberts, out by the old bridge. Adams says that he knows where Roberts is headed, so they all drive out there together.
So Crawshaw/Roberts is hiding in a mill.
As soon as Munyard and Pollitt walk in the mill, Roberts takes a shot at them, so they go hide behind some hay bales. They try to talk Roberts down, but it's not working.
Munyard and Pollitt tell him that they know who he is and the jig is up and they have the place surrounded.
And for some reason, Adams takes this moment to walk in and he also gets shot at. Roberts says that it was Brodie who was instigating all this mayhem. He claims that it was Mike's life or mine. While he's talking, Pollitt shimmies up a rope to sneak up on Roberts where he's hiding, and they start struggling.
Crawshaw/Roberts gets a hold of Pollitt and throws him from the hayloft. Then he himself jumps down and grabs Adams. Now that he has a human shield, Roberts tells Munyard to let the men outside let him leave, or Adams is going to get it. Munyard complies, but just then, a beaten but not broken Noel Brodie shows up out of nowhere, gun in hand.
How did he know where they were?
You haven't killed all the Brodies yet, Roberts, he says.
No, it's only 1 out of 3 so far.
An eye for an eye, or in this case, a hand for a hand. Adams takes advantage of the surprise and gets away from Crawshaw/Roberts.
By karate chopping his arm.
Crawshaw/Roberts gets a shot off, but so does Brodie. Roberts' shot wings Munyard. Brodie's shot hits Crawshaw square in the back, but he's still able to make a run for it, and Pollitt runs after him. Inside
the mill, Munyard relieves Brodie of his weapon and says that he just has a shoulder wound. It's no big deal, but Brodie does go for a doctor. Munyard and Adams have a chat and a smoke. Adams fills Munyard in on the thing that happened in the war.
Yep, he reflects back to the time he and Roberts and Brodie were prisoners of war.
And we pick up the scene in the officers' quarters where Roberts goes in, and we see him getting thanked because he spills the beans where the other two didn't. He gets to keep his hand.
But not his dignity.
As he's leaving the office, the other soldiers kick him, make him fall, and then laugh at him when he's down. Munyard notes that by spilling the beans, Roberts rendered their sacrifices worthless. And Adams says that not everyone can be strong. Some are born strong and some are born weak. And who are we to judge?
So Crawshaw and Roberts is still on the run, and Pollitt is hot on his tail. Crawshaw loses his balance and falls down a hillside. Apparently loses consciousness. As he lands near some railroad tracks, his hand rests over the track as a train approaches.
Yep, just then the Karma Express rolls past over his arm and doing what the Japanese did not do in Burma. Welcome back to the American International Podcast, where we are talking about The Hand from 1960.
This is kind of a quirky movie, isn't it?
It is. For one thing, it's one of the shortest movies in the AIP catalog and probably the shortest movie we've ever done. Although so much happens that by the time we describe it all, it's longer than the movie.
So The Hand was the first film written by screenwriters Ray Cooney and Tony Hilton, who also starred Ray Cooney as Sergeant Pollitt and Tony Hilton as Sergeant Foster.
So they're to blame for the various continuity errors and plot holes in the film, such as in the very beginning labeling the year as 1946, when the war ended in 1945. This movie was released in the UK on October 1st of 1960, and AIP released it on March 21st, 1961 in the United States. The tagline for the movie was, "From war-torn Burma to the asphalt jungles of the big city, his revenge was the crime of the century." I don't really believe that was the crime of the century. This movie was brought to us by the legendary Butcher Film Distributors. They're very legendary, apparently, but I know nothing about them.
One of the things that really stands out in the movie The Hand is the music score by Wilfred Burns.
It's very jazzy, got a great beat. It's basically the highlight of this movie for me. Wilfred Burns composed music for a lot of films, including the AIP feature Jennifer, but he did not receive a credit for that. There really was not a lot of information on this movie available to us, despite having a vast library of books about American International Pictures, including their British offerings. So we're not going to have a lot to tell you that you don't know just by watching the movie.
It's interesting to note that in 1961, when this movie was released by AIP, that it did not appear to have been released as part of a double feature, which leads me to speculate that this movie was acquired very cheaply from the British producers and just distributed as a B picture with whatever movie it could be paired with for a quick cash turnaround for AIP.
This movie has received mixed reviews. I found one from Brit Movie that said, "This Ray Cooney scripted post-war revenge thriller opens promisingly enough, but soon all tension and mystery is lost due to the predictable plot development and clumsy editing." Unseen Films wrote, "This is a neat little film that never fully makes 100% sense, but I like this movie a great deal. It's far from perfect, but it does hold your attention." In a lot of places, I found this movie listed as a horror film, but it's really more of a police procedural or perhaps a thriller. Would you agree?
Well, I think the horror just comes from the idea of having your hand amputated.
Which 3 people did in this movie. Just not the right 3 people.
a few cast members of The Hand had some other appearances in some AIP films. Derek Bond, who played Roger Crawshaw / Roberts, would go on to appear in Swingers Paradise in 1964. Bryan Coleman, who had played George Adams, had previously appeared in Rock Around the World in 1957. And Gerard Green, who had portrayed Simon Crawshaw, had previously appeared in Horrors of the Black Museum in 1959. So this may have been an inauspicious start for writer Ray Cooney, but he would go on to be awarded the Laurence Olivier Theatre Award in 1991 for Best Comedy for his play Out of Order, and another for his play Caught in the Net for Best New Comedy of 2001. And he was made an OBE, that's Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, in the 2005 Queen's New Year's Honours list for services to drama. So if you're British and you're in the field of drama, that's probably about as prestigious as it gets. But it all started with The Hand.
Well, as that is all the information we were able to scrape up about this movie, I think it's time to say what we thought of it. Jeff, using our AIP ranking scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic, how would you grade this movie?
Well, as I said, Cheryl, this is kind of a quirky movie. This is what they refer to as a pot boiler. It's a highly dialogue-driven film, and what's really unfortunate is the number of characters. And not only the number of characters, but the number of characters with unusual names, and the number of characters with the same names. When Brodie's brother introduces himself as Brodie's brother, he doesn't say he's Brodie, but he's Brodie as well.
I mean, he says he's there to see Brodie, but he's Brodie.
He says, I'm Brodie's brother. I think something's happened to him. So the names can get kind of confusing. They're unusual names like Crawshaw, Munyard, Pollitt. I would have changed all those. I would have had a Monroe and a Pollock and a Crenshaw. But not only are the names strange, we have several characters who are referred to by two names. Charlie Taplow is sometimes called Roberts on a confusion, and Roger Crawshaw is called Roberts as well. Now, the character of Robert / Roger Crawshaw is interesting. It's like his name is supposed to be a red herring through the whole thing, but everybody who knew him back in the days of the service seems to have known him as Roberts. And they're not familiar with this name, Roger Crawshaw, even though Roger Crawshaw is supposed to be this wealthy philanthropist. So was he enlisted under the name of Roberts? Was his real name Roger Crawshaw? Because he has a cousin, Simon Crawshaw. Is this just a plot hole and I'm reading too much into it? Cheryl is nodding her head yes. So it seems like there's information that is deliberately left out to keep you from solving this case sooner than the detectives. And the children in this movie are better detectives than the detectives. It's the little girl on the train who notices the half button missing. And it's Peter Adams, after his escape, that allows everybody to catch up to Roberts and for the movie to finally end. So it sounds like I have a lot of negative things to say, but I really did kind of like this movie. If I got to watch it just once, I probably would have been pleased, but I had to watch it 3 times. Not only to get the story straight, but just to make sure I was able to kind of talk about it for this podcast. So I think if you were just going to watch this as a distraction for 61 minutes, as long as you're able to keep the story straight with all these characters with weird names and sometimes the same names, you probably have an enjoyable time. What hurts this movie is the cast itself. Not that the actors are doing a bad job or anything, they're all fine, but to not have any recognizable cast members to latch onto is a detriment. Maybe if I was more familiar with British film from this time, I'd recognize some of these people. But being raised in the States, if they haven't appeared in films from Hammer or James Bond movies, I'm probably not going to know who they are. But that says more about me than it does the film. I'm going to give this film an I. It's entertaining. If you watch it once, it's okay. It's intermediate. What do you think, Cheryl?
I think you hit on a lot of the things that I would have said had I gone first. To me, this movie is not a movie. It's too short. I believe that one of the reasons that there's so much left out of the story that leads to these enormous plot holes is so that they could get it down to just an hour. I think if they had taken their time, thought through the mystery a little better, this movie could have had 10, 15 more minutes tacked onto it where everything would have been explained, We would know how Brodie got from being tossed off a train into a windmill he would have no idea existed. He didn't have any reason to know that we saw that that's where Roberts would end up. The mystery of who exactly Roger Crawshaw is never gets answered to my satisfaction. Like you said, everyone knows him as Roberts, but his cousin Simon Crawshaw knows him as Roger Crawshaw. What's his real name? That is never divulged. And then we don't really know the motive behind the amputation in the first place. While I was watching it, I speculated that Roberts, aka Roger Crawshaw, hired Charlie Taplow to give up his hand, paid him handsomely, of course, in order to get Brodie off his back. That perhaps Brodie was blackmailing Roberts with some piece of information. Perhaps it was the fact that he was a turncoat and gave up all those military secrets. We don't know what happened because of that. Perhaps men died, but that's never mentioned. But the motive for this whole movie, everything that happened, we don't know why it happened. I think that's a major flaw. And like you said, the acting is fine. It was very difficult to tell the characters apart on first go-round. They all look basically alike. A bunch of middle-aged British white guys with basically the same haircut. Most of them have the same last name as at least one other character. It's very difficult to keep the action straight when people keep coming into the movie. They have no identity of their own. They don't even have a name of their own. So that made the movie very hard to follow. If they had slowed down the pace a little bit, fleshed it out, I think this would be more comprehensible. Although, admittedly, I do like when movies don't take too much time. I hate a 2-hour movie. I love an hour-and-a-half movie. But an hour movie, you obviously had to make some sacrifices to get it down to that runtime. And they didn't work for me. The acting's fine. In another world, this could have been a television pilot. It could be the Inspector Munyard adventures.
The British Dragnet.
Right. Sort of grislier crimes that they have to solve. As a one-off, though, it doesn't really work for me. What did work for me was the score. Love the jazzy up-tempo music of Wilford Burns. I think any of those songs could have been played in A Bucket of Blood. They would have felt right at home there. I've been looking online trying to find this soundtrack. It doesn't exist as far as I know. However, if you find it, let me know. Message us on Instagram if you know how to find the tunes from this movie. Or you can email us at AIP_pod@popcultureentertainment.com. And so to sum up, if you put the good stuff in one hand and the bad stuff in the other hand, it kind of balances out.
What if you only have one hand?
But if you only have one hand, well, then you better put all the good stuff in it, because otherwise you'll be very disappointed. I, too, am going to give this movie an I. And with that, we'll wrap up this episode of the American International Podcast. I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And until next time, we'll meet you at the drive-in.
Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.